The polygraph test, how it broke Chris Watts' story. What if a single machine could unravel a web of lies, exposing a father's deadly secret? In one small beige room inside the Frederick Police Department, Chris Watts sat down thinking he could outsmart the system. He didn't know that the very machine in front of him, a polygraph, would play a crucial role in his downfall. It wasn't just about science or wires. It was about pressure, about psychology, about the truth clawing its way to the surface. This is a gripping breakdown of how a lie detector test shattered the false reality Chris Watts so carefully built and revealed the first undeniable crack in his horrific story. The build-up to the polygraph. By the evening of August 14th, 2018, less than 48 hours after Shanann Watts and her two daughters were reported missing, Chris Watts had already become the central figure in a growing mystery. The media had picked up the story. The community was on edge. But behind closed doors, law enforcement had a gut feeling. Something wasn't adding up. Chris had agreed to sit down with investigators for an interview, and in a surprising move, also volunteered to take a polygraph test. To the untrained eye, this may have seemed like a bold show of innocence. But to experienced interrogators like Tammy Lee, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation agent who conducted the polygraph, it was something else entirely. Watts' offer was a calculated risk, one he believed he could control. He was wrong. Understanding the polygraph. Polygraph tests, often referred to as lie detector tests, are not magic. They don't read minds. What they measure is physiological responses, heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, and sweat gland activity under stress. When someone tells a lie, those involuntary responses tend to spike. The machine records these changes, and the examiner interprets the results. Tammy Lee was not just administering a test. She was preparing a psychological trap. The questions were carefully crafted to minimize ambiguity and maximize emotional impact. Before the test even began, the psychological chess match was underway. Chris Watts enters the room. Watts arrived at the police station dressed casually, appearing calm, cooperative, and even friendly. But beneath the surface, his body language betrayed him. Tight jaw, forced smiles, frequent blinking. As he sat across from Tammy Lee, she gently explained the process. It would be a simple set of yes or no questions. Nothing to fear, she told him, as long as he was telling the truth. What followed was nearly an hour of pre-test discussion. This wasn't just protocol, it was strategy. Lee subtly emphasized the test's accuracy, its ability to detect even the smallest inconsistencies. She told him the machine was incredibly reliable. If he was lying, they'd know. Chris nodded along, maintaining his calm exterior. But his physiological responses were already beginning to show tension. The questions that changed everything. The polygraph test began with baseline questions. Is your name Chris? Are you sitting down? These were easy, meant to establish a physiological norm. Then came the real questions. Did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance? Are you lying about the last time you saw her? Do you know where she is now? Chris answered no to all, but his body told a different story. The machine registered spikes in stress levels each time he denied involvement. To an outside observer, the changes were invisible. To Tammy Lee and the polygraph chart, they were glaring. The result and the shift. Once the test ended, Lee didn't need hours to evaluate the data. She knew almost immediately Chris Watts had failed. She didn't sugarcoat it. Sitting across from him, she delivered the truth with precision. Chris, this polygraph exam indicates that you are being deceptive. In that moment, the tone of the investigation shifted dramatically. Watts didn't protest. He didn't deny the results. He sat silently, his eyes staring downward, hands clasped tightly. Lee leaned in. She told him there was no coming back from this. She knew he was lying, and now she had proof. The psychological pressure intensified. Watts was cornered, and everyone in the room knew it. The confession begins. Shortly after the polygraph, investigators brought in another strategy. Chris' father, Ronnie Watts. Knowing that Chris might break under the emotional weight of confronting his father, detectives stepped back and allowed a deeply personal conversation to unfold. Chris, now visibly broken, began to speak. What he said was only part of the truth, a partial confession blaming Shanann for the deaths of their daughters. But it was enough to dismantle the lie he had built. The polygraph wasn't the whole reason he confessed, but it was the crucial first crack in the dam. It provided investigators the leverage they needed to push him further. From there, the entire story began to unravel. The power of psychological pressure. The success of the polygraph test wasn't in its data alone, it was in the orchestration. Tammy Lee's calm confidence, the preparation, the pre-test dialogue, the build-up, all created a setting Chris Watts couldn't control. The lie detector became more than a machine. It became a symbol of truth, looming in front of a man whose entire world was built on lies. And when the machine spoke, it said what the world was beginning to suspect. Chris Watts was not the grieving husband and father he portrayed himself to be. In the aftermath, experts continue to debate the reliability of polygraphs in court. But in this case, its psychological effect was undeniable. It broke down a killer's defenses and pushed the investigation into a new phase. Closing thoughts. Chris Watts thought he could control the narrative. He smiled for cameras, cooperated with police, and even volunteered for a polygraph test. But when faced with a truth machine, his lies crumbled. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from a dramatic chase or a last-minute clue. Sometimes, it comes from sitting quietly in a room, hooked up to wires, and being asked one simple question: did you do it? And when the body says yes, even if the voice says no, the mask begins to fall.